Okay, is it working now? Oh. Okay. So my name is Liz Papazian. I'm the chair of the Russian department, and I'm here to welcome first Professor Sherry Parks, who's the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, which is one of the co-sponsors of this event. And so, Sherry, please.
Dean Bonnie Thornton-Till is away traveling, so on her behalf, welcome to the inaugural Maya Brin Resident Lecture. The Maya Brin Endowment in Russian was established in honor of Maya Brin, a lecturer in the Russian department here for nearly 10 years. The endowment was established by Professor Emeritus Michael Brin, a professor here in mathematics at the University of Maryland for more than 30 years. The endowment funds the residency, which brings leading Russian scholars, artists, and cultural figures to campus for short-term stays. Residents will be drawn from the fine or performing arts, literature, journalism, politics, history, literary or art criticism, or any other branch of the humanities or arts. As influential representatives of their field, Maya Brin residents will be figures around whom the intellectual life on campus can rally, in particular around the existing strengths in Russian studies in the various departments in the college. With successive residents drawn from different disciplines, each residency program will create synergies to inspire new interdisciplinary initiatives in teaching, the training of graduate students, and scholarship. The program relates to the mission of the College of Arts and Humanities as we work to bridge the best arts, the most rigorous scholarship, and the highest social aims of the country and the world. One of the areas in which we are working to develop is that of cultural diplomacy. So this residency, and Dimitri in particular, are quite welcome.
I'm going to talk to you. I have to introduce you. Okay, so I would like to introduce Dmitry Lvovich Bykov. Many of you have already heard of him. He's a prolific writer, a writer of poetry, of poems in prose, political feuilletons in sort of poetic form, novels, biographies. Most recent novel is, I believe, is Kvartal, but he's so productive that I don't know if I can keep track. He's won very many awards. He's a media personality who appears on TV and radio. He's a political activist. He's written essays on Russian literature and culture and current events. He's really what we would call a public intellectual in the broadest sense of the word, and so his work reaches across Russian society and really galvanizes debates on many different topics. His visit here, he's been here all this week. He has done a public reading of his poetry in Russian. He's visited a number of classes, including one on Dostoevsky, one on Pasternak, one on Stalin, and an advanced Russian class. He did a faculty seminar on his poetry, and today he actually has been participating in a conference all day long from 10 a.m. until now on the Soviet legacy. So you can also see that he has an incredible amount of energy, and he has been a huge amount of fun to have here because he's really someone who's a provocative thinker and speaker. So please welcome Dmitry.
Thanks for all those kind words. I think the best thing after all it would be to keep silence, not to disappoint you. Thank you for coming. I know that such a huge amount of listeners is connected not with my modest person, but with the person of Stalin. But I hope that maybe a shadow of his fame will follow me somehow, and maybe I'll be shining also. I must say, first of all, that that's not a lecture. I'm trying to organize a free talk on the topic which is not enlightened enough in Soviet historiography and in Russian historiography also. I'm just trying to cover this attempt to present the problem, the new approach for the problem, because we're quite sure that there are two ways of behavior under dictatorship. One is to be against, to hide yourself, maybe to write the truth on the lines and between the lines. Another attempt and another way is to be just on the side of evil. But there is the third part, the third path, which is maybe the most important and the most difficult. It is to influence the power somehow, to teach it, and to help in the creation of its own myth. In Russia we have only 7, or I consider them to be 7, attempts to teach Stalin or to address him as a person. Those attempts can be named strictly. The first one, unlucky one, was made by Nikolai Erdmann in his drama Suicide. The second by Mikhail Zoshchenko in his novel Before the Sunrise. The third one by Leonov. This was the first lucky one in his drama Invasion. The fourth by Bulgakov with his novel Master and Margarita, who may be the best known Soviet book all over the world, but Stalin haven't read it, unluckily. The fifth one, Nekrasov's novel Stalingrad, as it was named by the author. Then Boris Pasternak with his poem The Artist. I hope Stalin didn't understand it, and maybe that's Pasternak's greatest luck, because otherwise he could be destroyed. And the seventh one, maybe the most curious, was made by Ilya Ehrenburg in his novel The Storm. So let's talk about the problem of addressing Stalin. Maybe some of us had such an experience of attempt to be listened, to be heard by the power. As Dale Carnegie said, when you are talking to fish, you must speak about worms, not about berries which you like, for example, not about sandwiches. So when you talk to the dictator, you must not only be flattery, you must not only flatter to him, you must understand his soul and his past. You must give him advice, but not insult him by this advisory. You must understand his tastes, which always are rather common. People with delicious tastes never take power, as we know on our own experience. You, by the way, you must be understood, you must be clear, and more than this, you must talk to any imaginary person who is much cleverer than the dictator it is. He must feel that he is the hero of your mind, that you understand him better than he does, and nevertheless, you think that he is God, and you are, best of all, the creator of his myth. You know, this task is rather difficult, but somebody managed. The first task, the first attempt was made by Nikolai Erdmann, who, after the great success of his first play, Mandat, performed by Meyerhold, decided to write a tragi-farce, maybe a tragedy under the mask of comedy, which was called Suicide. The main person, the main hero, who is called Podsikalnikov, it can be translated like somebody laying under the axe, under the sword, somebody beheaded, but not beheaded at all. He has a chance. Podsikalnikov, partly beheaded. So the plot of the play is rather simple. A simple Philistine, Podsikalnikov, the small man of Russian literature, the classical continuation of Akakiy Akakievich, and so on, as hero of Marmeladov, so who you surely know. He is trying to commit suicide, but he is not decisive enough. So there are many people who try to get him good advices, how to commit suicide in the best way. So he must leave a note where he is protesting against communists, against anti-communists, against poverty, against NAP, and so on. Everybody gives him advices what to write in the recent note. By the way, Podsikalnikov decides not to finish his life this way and to continue his poor and nasty life with his wife and mother-in-law. And his final monologue, which is maybe the simple letter, the firm and straight letter to Stalin, this monologue was rather well known in Moscow, nevertheless the play was never performed. So the problem of this monologue is, the main top of this monologue is, please leave us, the simple Philistine, alone. Leave us the small part of life, leave us the small corner where we could live our small lousy life. We respect you, we understand that you are winners. We must keep only our lives and the kind of our sovereignty. Let us keep our narrow mind, our poor families, our poor interests. Let us whisper. You can't forbid us whisper, because whispering can't prevent your triumphant going, your triumphant path to the enlightened future. This play, which was read broadly in Moscow and everybody knew that Erdmann have created a masterpiece, this play was the reason of Erdmann's tragedy. We know very well that Vasily Ivanovich Kachalov, who was drunk a bit, the famous actor of Moscow theater, he was reading some Erdmann's fables to Stalin, and that is the fabulous reason of Erdmann's arrest. But we know that those fables couldn't insult Stalin at all. We know those fables very well, I can translate them, but we remember. Однажды НКВД, придя к Эзопу, схватила старика за жопу. Смысл этой басни ясен. Довольно басен. I think that nobody could be insulted by it because Stalin was very fond of obscene lexics. I knew personally some of his secretaries who told that such obscene lexics they couldn't hear even during the war. He was a very rough person, and nothing could make any harm in those very modest fables. For example, like «Рояль был весь открыт, и струны в нем дрожали». Смысл этой басни ясен, когда б не били нас, мы бы не писали басни. He knew that person should be beaten to write fables, and there was nothing new from him. I think that the main reason was suicide. The play which was suicide for the author. Because there could be no free corner for Philistines. Life under Stalin should be total. And if the simple humane, not a superhumane, just a weak person tried to create his independence, that was a kind of riot, and maybe the worst riot, because it's not the riot of a struggler. That's the riot of a poor, small, and rather foolish person. That's the most dangerous way. Any country can survive the riot of intellectuals, because intellectuals are very few, as we intellectuals know. But there is no country which can survive the riot of Philistines, which are the greatest majority, majority which is always winning. And by the way, the so-called perestroika was mainly the riot of majority, which was sick and tired of absence of the sausages. And so Podsikalnikov, as the most dangerous person, as the revolutionary of the new type, was understood by Stalin like an attempt to create the independent corner in Soviet life. So Erdmann never published this play and never wrote a serious play away. Nevertheless, he was planning to write the third play during all his life, and it was called The Illusionist, which is maybe rather sympathetic. The second attempt to talk to Stalin firmly and straightly was made by Boris Pasternak in his poem The Artist. The second poem of this poetic diptych can't be described anyhow because that's just a horrible poetical fool, and Pasternak told to his friends that it's written devil knows how, and maybe devil really participated in this typically graphomanic poem. But the first part is really significant for Pasternak, because in this poem he tried to explain to Stalin, but explain in his Pasternak's voice and in his Pasternak's own manner, that it is necessary to keep the artist somehow. The artist maybe is a kind of the chief itself, because it also has a power on brains, on minds, on people, on hearts, and so on. So the great chief of Soviet people should keep the artist because he is maybe a kind of his shadow, a kind of his very small copy. And Pasternak, in in rather resignated manner, described it like this. Как в этой двухголосной фуге он сам не бесконечно мал, он верит в знание друг о друге предельно крайних двух начал. I hope Stalin didn't understand who is on and who is the artist and why the artist sings some two-voiced fuga with the chief of the party. And maybe that saved Pasternak. Because if you call somebody, if you call yourself, for example, singing duet with the chief, that's not modest. And maybe that's not enough resignated. But Pasternak was the best translator of Georgian poetry, which was beloved by Stalin. And according to the legend told by Lev Sheinin, When Stalin saw Pasternak's name in the list of persons who should be repressed, he said, leave this dreamer alone. I don't believe in this legend because it had to happen in 1945 and Pasternak could appear in any list in 1938 only. But maybe some words like those could be told. Don't touch the dreamer, because nobody understands him, and he can write anything he wants. Why did Pasternak write this poem? What did he want to say to Stalin? I think his idea was rather simple. Maybe all the other people, except poet and chief, don't deserve any love of the chief. Maybe all the other people are simple and ordinary, and maybe they will die, and eternity will get rid of them rather simply. But we both, you and me, are going to the eternity, and we must keep each other, because we are the only persons which are rest from the epoch. I think this position is rather proud, but there is a kind of special dignity in it. And by the way, we know from Державин, а если что и остается, через звуки лиры и трубы. Only poet and the trumpet of marching troops, they are kept in the history. So if we are kept together, we must keep each other. I think this understanding of history is quite true. But Stalin didn't understand this message, because at this moment Pasternak didn't manage to write with his famous late simplicity. The third attempt, the most interesting, was done by Mikhail Bulgakov, who knew that Stalin's attention towards him was constant. We know that Stalin was visited for 27 or 29, legends are different, for 29 times, only 2 spectacles, only 2 great dramas. One of them was his favorite opera, Queen of Spades. Another one was the drama by Bulgakov, The Days of Turbines. And so, Days of Turbines, which were returned to the stage after 2 years of forbidding, that was the symbol of White Guard, which came on her knees to the chief and said, "We are with you. We are the losers. Take us and forgive us." And maybe Khodasevich was the only one who understood this drama like a scream of captured persons, like those who are broken. And so they still ask to take them into the enlightened world of future. Bulgakov knew that Stalin's attention to him was kind and sometimes very polite, because their famous talk, which Bulgakov called clear, strong, stately, and elegant, he said that sometimes Stalin even was attentive to, for example, for his asks. He asked to forgive Erdmann, and it was done after 3 years of exile, because he never forgave just as it is. Erdmann was forgiven only when he lived for 3 years in Siberia without family and job and hunger. So Bulgakov was right. Stalin really thought that he is a strong person, a strong mind, that he never asks, he always supposes his help. We know that when he was in great poverty, Stalin supposed him work in Moscow Artistic Theatre, and that phone call was very well known in Moscow. It was the sign that after Mayakovsky's suicide, power decided to listen to the writers, because 2 or 3 suicides would, especially when, for example, the most revolutionary poet is shooting himself, it would be harmful for the reputation. So Bulgakov was saved, and late in the 30s he decided to write, not to print, surely not to publish, the novel about the devil. We must say, first of all, that Bulgakov never had any hope to publicate this novel, even to read it to the big amount of friends. It was read only to closest, nearest, to those who will keep silence, like Sergei Yermolinsky, for example. Nevertheless, Bulgakov was afraid even of reading the novel to him. He was asking his wife, would he write some denouncing about it or not. So Bulgakov was writing this novel, as Marietta Chudakova wrote quite correctly, to the only reader, to the solemn, lonesome, sad reader who wants to create a new myth about himself. That's a message for Stalin. Message very understandable and very correct and very strong, but we must say, for example, that this is the message of a very bad taste. I understand surely that saying like this, I can be compared with Bulgakov as a writer, and everybody will know that all my good taste doesn't help me to be genius. By the way, bad taste is a sign of genius, because genius always breaks the laws of good taste. He begins the new literature. And Bulgakov began the new literature, the creation of Moscow myth, the broad intrusion of demonic forces into Soviet reality. He was the first one. But mean a very important thing. You surely can't imagine this novel published in the Soviet Union. Even when it was published in 1967, it was the greatest sensation. There was no the home of Soviet intelligentsia where dozen of pens didn't copy this novel to give it to the friends, to discuss it, to make illustrations for it, and so on. It was even so fashionable that all the staircase in Bulgakov's house was written and drawn, and so we could see there the famous slogan, "Wall and count, we are waiting for you." I remember it very well in the 70s. But we can't imagine this novel published in 30s, 40s, and nevertheless under the Stalin's government. But we know that this novel was written not for publication. It was written to convince Stalin. What was the message? Let me name the 3 novels written in Russia in 1938, which is rather symbolistic. The first one is the novel about devil who came into Moscow. You know this novel, that's Master and Margarita. The second one is about an angel who came into Moscow also to check the situation. The angel was frightened and flew away. The angel, whose name was Bykov, something smoky, was written by Leonid Leonov in 1938, and it was called Pyramida. He published it only 50 years later. And the third novel was rather popular. It was published in 1938. It's a novel, Starik Khattabych, by Lazar Glagin, Soviet childish writer, some master of science fiction. The novel about genius who was found by swimming pioneer. The pioneer found the big pot, and the genius was sitting there, and then when he was let to go, he began to work at the circus. Well, it's rather typical that the devil has left Moscow, saying that nothing had changed, only the problem with flats was rather harmful for morality. The second idea was about the angel who also flew away after Stalin made him as a proposition you can't refuse. He asked him to help in his main plan to give some cell for the mankind, because the mankind is growing too high, we must stop it. So Angel was afraid of such a task and flew away also. But genius felt himself rather comfortable. He became the pioneer. Then he's continuing to work in the circus. He's rather successful. And the final scene of the novel is he is going to Soviet school and writing there a dictation. Sometimes I'll grow up. He is about 3,000 years, as I recall. So the problem is that there is no place for Christianity in Bulgakov's Moscow, in Stalin's Moscow. There could be no place for devil and angel. There is no place for kindness and angel and devil. There is place only for genius, who is pre-Christian and pre-moral. That's the most important thing. For example, Stalin was called by Pasternak the titanic figure of pre-Christian. When Alexander Gladkov, Meyerhold's vice director, asked him what did he mean by pre-Christian, maybe we should say about post-Christian, Pasternak smiled and said, there will be no post-Christian epoch. Christianity is the top, the last epoch of the mankind. But pre-Christian, which doesn't know moral, is the motherland of Stalin's ideas. So we see that Bulgakov's attempt to talk to Stalin was practically immoral. And maybe he wanted to say that there can be no moral in the new world. We must throw it away. And maybe he told to Stalin that he is the same force of evil which always, without any intention, creates good and great deeds. But if you want to be kept in history, if you want your memory to be clear and pure, you must keep the master. You must keep the artist. That was Pasternak's message, told in the most understandable language. It was understandable because Bulgakov tried to use Stalin's lexics. There is an interesting paradox. In all Bulgakov's creations written before the novel, we never found the word master. He didn't use it at all. Now it's rather simple to check this idea with a computer. You can take all the corpus of Bulgakov's texts and you will never find the word master. When in 1934, in the August of 1933, Mandelstam was giving his final concert in Moscow Polytechnic Museum, Boris Eichenbaum, who was just saying some kind words about Mandelstam in front of it, he said, we never must call Mandelstam master, because master is a slave. He is an artist, which is much more important. But when Stalin was talking to Pasternak about Mandelstam's case, he was asking constantly, but is he master? Because for him this word was rather significant. Surely he didn't speak English and he didn't know that master is the owner of something. But master for him was a professional, and that's most important. He didn't believe deep in his heart that a poet couldn't be a good professional in his work. And he wanted to save Mandelstam, he told, isolate but keep. That was his resolution. He wanted to keep him only because of his ability to write beautiful verses. By the way, all Stalin's verses, we know 11 of them, are very beautiful. And that's the most strange thing. You know that the most of dictators were good lyrics. For example, like Mao Zedong, who was, for example, also writing verses, and one of them, I remember it very well, is about the beautiful river which is going between rocks. Then blue fog goes on it and hides it, but the sun comes over and helps it, and we can see the blue river again. Blue river is his wife, which has connection with the position. Fog is a position, and you guess who is the sun. Everything is quite clear here. So Stalin was the true adorator of lyrics. He loved brilliant, good lyrics. Georgian one, for example. He loved Nicolas Baratashvili, Ilya Chevchavadze. He was very fond, for example, of Pasternak's translations, like Blue Collar, which he knew by heart, and maybe some of his sin would be forgiven for it. But the most important thing is that Bulgakov had found the true tone to talk to Stalin. Master, that's the type of the artist, and we know only that he creates masterpieces. He is a good professional in his work writing historical novels. Never then Bulgakov used this word again. And the second, a very important thing, Bulgakov's novel is written in such manner which could be understood by the simple student of seminary, by the person who never had education, but sometimes maybe in exile in Siberia, was reading Niva, some simple magazines with simple symbolistic prose. We must say that Bulgakov's novel is separated from his other prose, from Life of Molière, for example, of Белой гвардии. It's separated stylistically. Master Margarita, as Henrietta Yanovskaya, not Henrietta Yanovskaya, but Zeev Barcela in his book written together with Maya Kaganskaya in Israel, they wrote quite correctly, I should say, that the style of many Wallendish scenes is much worse than the media style of Bulgakov's works. Sometimes we see all his attempts to be not only understandable, but to be too bright, too glamorous, and sometimes the bad taste is quite evident, especially during this huge parade of evil in Wallen's flat. We understand very well that this novel was written not to be popular among such intelligentsia like, for example, intelligentsia of 30s. It was written for a person who had a very bad taste and who loved opera. We know that Stalin was very fond of opera, not only Russian. He loved Carmen, for example. He loved Leon Cavallo. And so it's not a bad taste, but that's a glamorous taste, a common taste. And as a director of his own spectacles, of his own dramas, he had the horrifying taste of provincial actor. All those courts, all those judges with their speeches, all this parade of persons who adopted their guilt, that was just the sign of good acquaintance with very bad drama. And so Bulgakov's novel is written as a very bad drama. By the way, the most important thing also is that, like Alexander Miller was writing in his famous work, Bulgakov's Bible and Bulgakov's Moral, he wrote there that the personality of Christ is somehow magically divided into poor and kind Yeshua and strong and mighty Pilatus. We know that Christ is not only kindness, Christ is knightness. Christ is the warrior. And so this warrior, like Pilatus, and his main coordinator, Afranius, who maybe has some common features with Agranov, Afranius, Agranov, we can see some common, something common in their names. Pilate is the force, and you can't save the world if you don't have force enough to struggle against ordinary people. By the way, we know that Pilatus is just a typical portrait of Stalin who kills Judas and kills him talking to Afranius, I know that this night he will be killed. This order is given in such a fabulous manner, like in magic tales. Stalin was very fond of them also. By the way, Bulgakov knew that the allocation to print the Golden Calf was given personally by Stalin, because Fadeev was afraid of this satirical novel of Ilf and Petrov, and he forbid it. He forbid it, and he wrote them a special letter that your Bender is too sympathetic. But Stalin liked the novel and allowed to publish it. So we can see, by the way, Stalin liked Ilf and Petrov so much that nobody of them suffered from repressions, and they were allowed to go to America, and even their Small America was published in the time of the beginning of the new war against America. Cold, but also very well noted. We know that in the middle of 30s, Stalin began the huge rebirth of Russian nationalism. And so America has become Russian enemy number one. But the Small America, written by Ilf and Petrov, was published because he loved them. And so Bulgakov tries to imitate their style. We see, as Kagansky wrote in her book quite evidently, she proved it, we can see that there are many parallels between the team of Walland and the team of Bender. Bender himself is a typical Walland, and maybe Walland is not a Saturn. Walland is just a clever thief, the type of the main person of a thief novel. Balaganov, who is red-haired and has very white teeth, teeth, yes, he can be compared with the Knight of Hollow Azazela. Sure, Koroviev has something in common with Panikovsky, mean their famous hats, and Kozlevich transformed into the cat behemoth, because the two favorite animals of the devil are the black cat and the black goat. So we can see Kozlevich and the cat, which are devil's best friends. Bulgakov imitated Ilf and Petrov, not only because he was a good friend of them and respected them very much, and maybe he was one of the very few writers who considered Ilf to be a great writer. He told it to his wife after Ilf was dead from TB. But I am quite sure that he wanted to be understood by Stalin, and so imitated the style of typical satirical novel. It's the best way to put your words into the ear of tyranny. So what was the message? The message is named by Yeshua. He says, if they remember me, they'll remember you also. So keep the artist, because he is your monument. Let us, the artist, be alive. Let us create something great. You know that all those small people, they don't deserve your kindness, but keep us, keep you and me, and we will go on this famous moon's path in the epilogue together. I can say that this moral is not too humane. But nevertheless, I must say that if you are trying to be understandable by Stalin, to create a glamorous myth for him, you couldn't be good Christian. Sure, you must be super humane without traditional understanding of moral. You must be super moral or maybe under moral, but you must talk to him without any remembrance of his deeds. You must think of concrete use of this talk. You must have a concrete aim. And you don't have any right to think about your sons and grandsons. What will they say about you? Maybe they will dislike you, but now you should act to save artists, to help those who is oppressed, to save the art itself. And maybe that's the only task, because the art is the only thing which is eternal. I don't know how would Stalin understand it, but the same idea which was somehow expressed in the play Batum wasn't understood by him, and he, without any oppressions to Bulgakov, he decided to forbid the play, and after it, Bulgakov understood that his trade with some evil is broken by this evil. That was the reason of his very soon death in the age of 48. The next message, which was sent by Leonid Leonov, was the smartest, and that was the first one which was heard. I mean Leonov's drama Invasion. We know that Leonov was nearly repressed in 1938, the same year, when he published his famous play, The Snowstorm. There was no success with it. There was a partly success in Moscow, for example. Intelligentsia liked it very much because repressions were named there just without any metaphors, strictly. But after the government's critics, it was forbidden, and Leonov was waiting for the arrest every night. He managed to collect his things in the famous small box. Those boxes were standing under all the beds of Soviet writers at that time. They were ready, and by the way, sometimes I think it's useful to be ready, because the presence of death makes your work more concrete and more spiritual. That doesn't mean that I'm such a fan of fear, and I dislike it in my personal case. But speaking about others, it sometimes is a good stimulation. So Leonov decided to rehabilitate himself somehow, but he was a good tactic and maybe a good strategical mind. He was waiting for 3 years. In 1941, in the evacuation in Chistopol, he wrote his best drama. Pasternak called it chef-d'oeuvre. Nevertheless, he disliked Leonov very much, but this concrete play seemed to be brilliant. He called it masterpiece. Invasion is the play about the small Russian city which is now under German army, and so there is a person who came just not long ago from the prison, from the concentration camp, and he is not offended to the power. More than this, he is ready to participate in the resistance, and he is the best partisan. Some of party leaders, some of party, the most active persons, some of the members of the party sometimes seem weak and they are afraid of Germans. But those who were in camps and who are in habit of horrible conditions of life, they are ready to resist. This message was heard, and Leonov got Stalin's prize of the first stage. He was even more clever. He gave all these prize, about 50,000 rubles, big money at this time, 5,000 after reform. He gave it all to build the new plane, and Stalin thanked him with a special letter and told, for example, to Paskrebushev, who's secretary, to say that he likes this act. And Leonov won. He was safe. I must say that this play, this idea, was taken and understood by Stalin because he wanted to see any rehabilitation. You know that all the problem of the Soviet Union, all the reason of our troubles in 1941 was that some of people, and maybe even some of warriors and some of soldiers, were not ready to resist. They were waiting for fascists who would come and destroy Bolsheviks. They were sick and tired of life under Bolsheviks. And then, when they saw that the enemy is much worse than any the most cruel Bolsheviks, they began to resist like beasts, and there happened the first great event under Moscow, and maybe that was the first shock for Hitler during all the campaign. And when Stalin read this play, he understood he is forgiven by his people because they are ready to defend him. Defend not only him, sure, defend their earth, defend their homes, mothers, fathers, sons, and so on. But nevertheless, they forgive him, and they understand that such a chief is necessary now when there is no choice between Hitler and Stalin. So he understood the message, and he gave his first prize to Leonov, thanking him for such a forgiveness. And maybe that was the reason that in 1945, Stalin asked everybody to drink for the endless patience of Russian people. He surely meant not patience, but resignation. But that's rather important. This famous toast for patience, which was painted many times and filmed many times, that's maybe the firm consequences of Leonov's play, because this is quite the forgiveness for all the sins of 30s. That's the forgiveness of terror. Now we are together, now there is no borders between us, we are the whole body of war, the whole body of people which is united by the great distress, and now will be united forever. Stalin sure continued his terrorist practice after the war, but during the war he needed this united body, and Leonov was the cleverest to talk about it. The next message was Viktor Nekrasov's novel Stalingrad, which also managed to get this first Stalin's prize. Second stage. Nobody could believe it, because we all know that Stalingrad was a miracle for the after-war reader, who was quite ready to any glamorous also and shining and bright novel about our victories. Like, for example, Bubernov's blamed novel Белые березы. This novel, which was about the good warriors, bright victories, and beloved chief. Stalingrad, written by Nekrasov, was a novel published in Znamya magazine in 2 numbers, in the same 10th number where appeared the famous Stalin's article against Zvezda Leningrad. We know that he and Zhdanov were the 2 authors of that famous order which closed the magazine Leningrad and broke Zvezda, the star, and broke the fates of Akhmatov and Zoshin. It was just the beginning of the new era of repression in literature, and after it, Nekrasov manages to become the most popular Soviet writer. He gets his Stalin's prize. Why? His novel is about the most difficult days of war. There is a novel about horrible conditions of Stalingrad life. That was the novel about people who are quite sure that would be dead next day. Why? Stalin praised this novel. Because there was the same message. Maybe now we're suffering, but we become superhuman. And you may believe in us. Soviet people under such horrible conditions become only better. And those conditions maybe is the most condition of their transferring into something superhuman. In our usual life, we are ordinary people, but when we are fighting for you, Comrade Stalin, when we are seeing death any day, eye to eye, when we are ready to give our life to you, we become the true professionals of war. And we seem to be so free during this war. Nobody and nothing suppresses us. We are true giants, giants of the new type of state. So these professionals of war were described by Nekrasov with such force, with such love. Now we understand that there is no victory in this novel. It stops suddenly. Nekrasov was dreaming to write the 3rd part, but it divided into some short stories. He was quite sure that there is no necessity to describe victory. The main victory is that people become super, that they can jump over their human being, their fears, their hopes, their letters at home. Now they are lonesome, like real giants. Nobody will help him, nobody will help them, and they understand that they are the last barrier on the way of triumphant evil. I think that this image of Soviet people was clear to Stalin. I must mean that Stalin was not against the truth. For example, he even praised the novel by Galina Nikolaeva, which was called Harvest. The novel Harvest of 1948, which describes the lousy life of kolkhoz. But all the peasants there become only kinder and better in this lousy life, in their poverty, in their cold, and they are ready to thank Stalin for such a brilliant case to become superhuman. By the way, the party secretary, which acts there, is quite a copy of Stalin because he is kind, he is soft, he tries to talk to them as to people, and he thanks them for patience. So I understand this parable. Nekrasov created the type of Soviet man which becomes only better after all problems which are falling on his head. The seventh example, which is maybe not very well known now, the novel is forgotten, but Jonathan Little praised Ehrenburg very much because he practically rewrote this novel like Benevolence, using maybe Junger's notes also, and now we get The Storm 2, which is rather popular in Europe now, and even in the USA also. The Storm, written by Ehrenburg, was met by the common silence of critics, and then it was criticized. It was a kind of the second storm, the storm of critics, which appeared in newspapers. And by the way, there was a special writers' meeting where Ehrenburg was nearly suppressed. For example, Sholokhov said that Ehrenburg is Jew, he is a typical Aryan, and his novel is a novel of a people, the novel of a writer who was never a true Soviet citizen. Nikolai Gorbachev, the most famous fool of Soviet writers' organization, said that there are no alive Russian person in novel. They all are killed. Only Europeans are alive. And that's maybe a kind of Ehrenburg's mysterious idea to kill all Russians. Then the talks were very long. They were blaming him for 3 hours, and then he was given a word for answer. He raised on the tribune, rather calm but pale, and said, "Dear friends, you are in virus, you don't understand the novel, but I have readers. Readers understand it. Here's the reader from the worker of a plant. The whistles began in the hall. Here is the letter from the simple girl of kolkhoz, the whistles again. And one letter for the reader, which is maybe the most dear to my heart. I have just finished your magic storm. Thank you for artificial, I don't remember the exact word, thank you for artificial Marcus, Joseph Stalin. After it, there was silence, and then the third storm, the storm of applause. This novel has got the first prize by Stalin, and I didn't know why. What was the message which was heard by Stalin? We know that this novel sometimes seems even nearly racist, because there is such a deep Jewish hate for Jews, which is rather understandable and rather acceptable, that nothing could be, for example, nothing could be pleasant for Stalin here, who hated Jews maybe even more than Hitler. But the main thing, look, he didn't show it. Sometimes he even tried to save them. But the main thing is, there was one thing which he hated much more than Jews. That was Europe. And Ehrenburg's novel was anti-European in its essence. Ehrenburg gave his message. Maybe Soviet power has great mistakes, but Soviet power has created a new type of state which could overcome fascism, and Europe forced to do this. France gave up. Germany was broken by the Soviet Union and partly by America and England. England betrayed our friendship during Fulton's speech by Churchill. Only we are white and fuzzy. Only we are the best. And this message was read, because this anti-Europe novel was the same essence of Stalin's philosophy. Europe is our past. Soviet Union is our future. And maybe Ehrenburg made his great effort to write this novel, because there are many useful and important ideas in this novel, many anthropological ideas, many cultural ideas, and all it was published and praised because there was main idea, not very important for Edinburgh, Europe fall, and we did overcome. Finishing this brief speech, I'd like to remember one of the most favorite stories ever written in Russia. That's the story of Alexei Tolstoy, Russian character. Tolstoy died in 1945, just after the publication of this story. But I'm quite sure that he would get his new Stalin's Prize for it. Because this message, not only for Stalin but for all people, is quite understandable. I'll try to decipher it. I think it's risky, but I think I understand it. That's a story from the cycle Рассказы Ивана Сударева, Ivan Sudarev's stories, about Igor, who was just a tankist, who returns back home in a very short discharge after a wound. His face can't be recognized by anybody because he was in fire, and he doesn't name himself. He goes to his parents and to his fiancée without naming himself anyhow, who says that he is just a friend of their son. He brought some letters from him, some hello for him, and that's his only task. He keeps this secret during 3 days and then goes away again. Nobody recognizes him. But then you've got a letter from his mother. She says, "My heart knows you, my son, visited my home. I know you, I recognize you." And his fiancée writes, "Maybe you are not as pretty as you were, but not as handsome as you were, but I love you and I recognize you." And so he feels that they need him anyhow. The moral is rather simple. That's the story about Russian soul which met its Soviet face, its horrible Soviet face, but it recognized its Russian essence. And so the idea of the closeness, of the unity between Russian and Soviet, this idea which helped Soviet to win the war, this idea was the main, and maybe this message to Stalin was also the main. Was it so or was not so? We can argue now, and so that's all I could say. Thank you as much as possible.
One question. You skipped over Zoshkin.
Just a moment. Oh, sorry. I'll tell you. Yeah. Maybe I'll just try to escape it because the topic is long. But I'll try. Zoshenka's novel, which was the reason of his famous loss during last years, was a false attempt to talk to Stalin as to modernist. Many people, like Pilnyak, for example, and partly like Mandelstam, they were trying to write their messages for Stalin like for a person who wants to create the new humane type. But Stalin was rather archaic, and he was a typical archaist. When we tell, for example, about Stalin's modernization, we must know that there was demodernization made by him. He destroyed all the people who were trying to modernize the industry. And that industrialization was made in spite of him, not without his help. Without his help. Because Orджоникидзе, which was killed by him, American engineers which were sent away and partly killed by him, or some, for example, some first directors like Shalva Kudjava were also killed and destroyed by him. He was not a modernizator. As Leonov wrote in Pyramida, who was maybe the giant, I don't know how to translate, Tormos. Yes, let's call it there, like drivers. That was just the obstacle on the way of progress, not the progressist. And Zoshenka was mistakenly sure that Stalin wanted to create the new type of person. Stalin liked superhuman, if those superhuman were just his usual soldiers without any hope, but and in horrible conditions. But the creations of a new type of men, the new type of people, was hated by him. And when Zoshenko, in his novel Before the Sunrise, tried to mention some new practice which could make your conscience free, and using Freud's practice and Jungian's ideas and so on, surely he was wrong, because his book could make anybody free. But free person and free mind can't be understood by Stalin. That was a big mistake to continue Lenin's line and to think that Stalin liked the philosophy of modern or the philosophy of enlightenment. No, only darkness. And so the pathos of enlightenment, which fulfills Zoshenko's novel, was hated by him. That was the reason that quite innocent novel, self-biographic, with brilliant stories about his youth, was criticized so much and made Zoshenko to be the main enemy of Soviet literature. Don't hope that Tyran can be modernist. He doesn't want to modernize anything. He wants to come back to the times of slavery, to prehistory and pre-Christian times. Maybe something else. Да, пожалуйста.
I wanted to ask, all these authors, do you think they wrote to really influence Stalin or to pass his censorship? Were they really personally talking to him or trying to self-express themselves or talk to the public and just pass his censorship?
Well, the question is really, did they mean? Yes, they did. I hope that they did. Leonov did exactly, because he was the cleverest one. Well, maybe the cleverest was Babel, who didn't even try. But it didn't save him. Maybe his last book could save him, but he was destroyed, he was taken before it was finished. Leonov was maybe the cleverest, and he wanted to influence Stalin, sure. Pasternak wanted to influence him. I hope that Zoshenko also hoped. He had such intention, because he was sure that his novel will help Soviet people to win the fascism. And he was right. But it was not Stalin's aim to win fascism. His aim was to win Germany, which is much more important. And fascism as itself could be even useful for him sometimes, as we see, for example, in 1949. I think Stalin is the worst, the most diabolic figure in Russian history. And I'm quite sure that Zoshenko's humane, enlightened ideas, his kind and soft ideas were just ununderstandable for him. His attempt to make the free mind, the shining of free mind, surely it couldn't be adopted. I'm quite sure that Ehrenburg knew Stalin's reaction, and maybe that was his way to publish his rather important novel and to make it acceptable for Stalin. Okay. If everything is clear, maybe no, but maybe it's not. I'm ready, you know, but it's such a problem for you, I know, to ask something if everything is really so understandable. Soviet history is rather simple. We know where is evil, where is kind. Yeah, well, for example, if I'd like to influence Barack Obama somehow, maybe I'd mention his public work somewhere in Chicago, his work with ordinary people, with simple people, his ability to talk to them. Maybe I'd write for him something like The Dreams of Our Fathers, something like this. Maybe he is influenceable. If you like to influence him, my good advice is to take this topic. The so-called the new type of the hero of working class. Now maybe the hero of office class, but nevertheless it can influence him. If you have some good advices for him to overcome the crisis, and now America is suffering greatly from the crisis now, so something like this, maybe he will hear you. Okay.
How much of the past legacy do you still see in current Russia today?
Well, I think Russia is always repeating its historical cycle. I have read many books about it. Repeating also, but repetition is the only way of life if you live in such a repeating country. But nevertheless, I'm quite sure that now Russia becomes new. You won't recognize it very soon. It accumulates the great and positive changes. Maybe the main problem of our society is that it's not corporative. There are very few connections between people. Everybody wants to kill the neighbor or the political opponent. But now, not Marx, but Steve Jobs made the hugest revolution. We are all transparent for each other. We're all connected with iPhones. And iPhone can make us more friendly, more transparent, more understanding. And maybe those social connections and net connections will become Russia corporative and solidar. And this solidarity will lead to brilliant changes. I can't say what changes, because there are many neighbors from my motherland, and they are listening very attentively. Then they will write reports about my lecture, meaning, please. And I'm quite sure, now I say especially for them, I believe in our glamorous future. I'll allow myself to remind you the famous movie Подвиг разведчика, the heroic scout. When they are drinking, the scout is drinking with, the spy is drinking with some German military, and German military says, let's drink for victory. For our victory, underlines he. Yes, for our glamorous future.
Thanks for a really great provocative lecture.
Provocative lecture, yeah, thanks.
I enjoyed it. I just wanted to ask about what it's like to be a Russian author. About 20 years ago, my advisor in graduate school wrote a book about the loss of significance suffered by Russian authors with the fall of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union, everyone paid attention to authors, and then end of the Soviet Union, no one pays any attention. They're just normal people like everywhere else, like in the West, just authors, just doing literature, who cares? And I think that might have been something that many people would have agreed with until about 5 years ago, but certainly in the 2011-2012 sort of long protest year in Russia, the sort of gear turned again, and suddenly people were paying attention to authors, paying attention to people like you, at the center of the protests on Bolotnaya, etc., addressing the crowds. And I wanted to ask what it's like to experience that transformation in the significance of you and your work.
Well, first of all, I must underline that we are discussing Stalin. Bolotnaya is not the topic of our lecture.
I know, but
we can talk about it after.
Okay.
But I'll answer your question.
Thank you.
Seeming so brave. You know, in famous drama by Grigory Gorin, as I recall, it was The House Which Was Built by Swift, about Jonathan Swift. There was a brilliant dialogue. For the first time, he decided to buy the actors, but it was useless. And at this moment, he decided to buy the spectators. It was effective. So I must say that now, if you want to be heard in Russia, you must not talk to the actors or to the tyrants or to the power. You must talk to the spectators. You must be understood by the simple, the ordinary, usual readers. Because now the problems which are standing in front of Russia are too complicated to be solved by the power. And power itself is not our only hope. We don't have the straight dictatorship. We have something like this, but very far from it, truly. And there are no writers with the boxes under their beds, maybe except some paranoics. And I must say that now if you want to change the world, you must not talk to the head of state. You must talk to the people. You must be understood by them. For example, we are always said that Soviet readers don't read any literature. That's a lie. They are reading Twitter, for example, all the time, because Twitter is speaking about their lives, so we must be as brief and strong as Twitter. That's our task. We must be heard by our country, and it depends not only on country, it depends on our ability to be understandable, interesting, catching, like David Foster Wallace, for example. Yeah, we need Russian David Foster Wallace, Russian William Geddes, Russian Mark Danilevsky, who will explain the new stage of Russian life, and I hope we'll get them.
Thanks for presentation. You both found that men of a poor taste because you like opera. So now, at this point, he still understood the role of artists. Do you think it's more complicated to talk to a person who surrounds himself with the stars of chanson?
Так, поскольку все понимают по-русски, давайте уточним вопрос. Считаю ли я, что проще обращаться к человеку с оперными вкусами? Да? Well, I think the simplest thing is to address the person who has concrete tastes. And Stalin's tastes were very usual, but very concrete. If you wanted to be understood, you should make movies like Volga-Volga. Everybody knew that this movie was really great. By the way, you surely know that famous historical and quite true anecdote about the three filmmakers which were invited to Stalin. Pudovkin, Alexandrov, and Eisenstein. He said, I love your movies. What would you like to have? Pudovkin said, I have some problems with the car. Eisenstein said, I need dacha for lonesome thinking of the new movie. And Grigory Alexandrov said, Comrade Stalin, I'd like to get your book, The Questions of Leninism, with your signature. Next day, he got the book, the dacha, and the car. So you must know his tastes, just to be understood. That's why he said, if he had tastes. He was a classical Eastern dictator. But it's much more difficult, for example, if you have business with Barack Obama, who is not a classical dictator. And if you want to be liked by him, you must be a very cute person. I even can't imagine what should you write to be heard by him, to get citizenship, for example.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about the editors in this whole process. I was reading your Kurs Sovietskaya Literatura, and I was really fascinated by your comments about Lunacharsky, who probably would not have fallen under my lectures of Soviet literature in my classes. And I was reading Lydia Zhukovskaya's Laboratory Redaktora, and she was complaining about how Russian literary tastes had, Soviet particularly tastes had turned didactic.
Well, Mikhail Weller, who was one of the most prolific and popular writers in Russia, published such a true historical anecdote again. Fyodor Panfyorov was making the France speech. He was the France speaker on the Congress of Editors. He went just on the stage, very pale and very angry, and said, if it depended on me, I would hang all the editors like dogs. But because I can't have such ability now, I declare your Congress opened. The reason was rather simple. You know that Soviet editorial practice was the same dictatorship. And sometimes it was good because the writers couldn't write well enough. Some of the editors were such adequate and delicate like Lydia Zhukovskaya. Some of them, for example, were changing the necessary words, and sometimes they even were saying, this plot is bad, let's make another final episode. So editorial practice, as for me, is a kind of dictatorship. I'm always against it. And if it depended on me, sure, I wouldn't hang them, but I would just forbid this profession. But nevertheless, as it's not my ability, I greet you and wish you best success on your difficult way. For you and for others, readers in Russia, who are my true army, for those who understand me better than all this rotten West.
What I meant by my question is, can a writer really choose whom he addresses in the way that you described? I look at you as an example of a very good writer, in my opinion.
Thank you so much.
And frankly, I cannot imagine you writing to order, even to your own order, being different than what, in a way, it can be rephrased in a different way, saying that your writing style, your thinking style, your living style carries your work. It's not the other way around. You cannot, like, you need to be a different person.
Well, you see, sometimes and mostly I write for solving my own problems. That's true. That's correct. But when life touches you, as Goncharov said, you will write for the power to make your ideas understandable for it. And life touched them and 30, and they had a necessity, a strong necessity, to talk to power, to explain her, keep us and we'll be together in the memory. НКВД, придя к Эзопу, схватила старика за жопу, как мы знаем. Да? If it didn't, Aesop would write for himself. And I tried to write for himself. But be sure that if I had such necessity, I would address to any audience, because writer must be not only the free singer, he must be a master also. And if he wants to save not only his own life, but some other lives, he must be heard by power, and that's the part of our talent. I hope I would never use it in such aims, even for Barack Obama. Thank you very much.
Very much. We should be having a reception, so everyone is welcome to it. And I just wanted to mention that I didn't thank everyone that I should thank. So first of all, I wanted to thank Michael Bryn, who is the one who created the endowment, the School of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, the College of Arts and Humanities, and of course the libraries who are hosting us here. Thanks very much.